I always used to go for older guys, and people would tell me I had daddy issues, and I'd be like, I don't have daddy issues. I love my dad. I just love your dad more. But
all right. Am I only going to take it halfway? No. I'm going to give it to you raw. We go all the way in this article on this podcast. Quote, I am not going to tell you that 90% of Natalie Cuomo's success is a result of her sex appeal. I am going to argue that it's a solid 100%. And worse, that sex appeal is cycled through several successive stages of commercialization that seem to have corrupted the already corrupt process of auditioning that stand-up comedy is supposedly built upon.
remember that time, like, we took a bath together, and I shaved my pubes in the bath, and you got mad at me?
I maintain that was the wrong thing to do on your part. The shower was broken at the club we were working on the road, so she just started shaving her pubes in the start of the bath, not even the middle or the end.
Sam, you don't understand. Like, sometimes you just gotta go. Like, I can't stop
Yeah, but I'm
touching. I gotta get
sensitive
them
to
off.
stuff. It felt like a bunch of
I
tags
gotta
and
get them
shirts.
off. Like, sometimes I just gotta get those things off.
Yeah, and then we were floating around in it like shrapnel.
It's kind of like make your own bath bomb type of deal.
It's a terrible bath bomb.
I honestly think that might be the most expensive bath bomb we've ever dined in.
Dined in? Where did you go? You've eaten a bath bomb?
I want to jump off a bridge.
Why?
I don't know.
I want to say about you, Melissa, you have been on the other side of this equation. You have made comedy videos, and several of them were hit, successful comedy videos. And you have made separately at least one video complaining that you hate your job and you're going to quit. Not the job you currently have, the job you did quit at that time. All right?
Yeah.
So, one of those is a completely scripted, rehearsed, professional performance. It is comedy. It is for the audience. It is about a topic. It's making a point, you know? And the other is an autobiographical monologue. And it has a kind of searing intensity and sincerity and emotion to it. And it would be ruined if it were scripted. It would be ruined if it were rehearsed. You know, I'm thinking of that video where you just said, look, I hate my job so much, I'm going to quit after only one day. You know, the realest thing in the world. That's why I got on YouTube in the first place. I love that genre, right? But it's not comedy. And there is no way you would get on the microphone at a nightclub with people paying $20 a ticket to sit down. They come, they pay for parking, they take hours out of their life, they sit down, they buy alcohol. They're getting the brain damage and paying all this money. You would never get on stage and then do a free-form autobiographical monologue about how much you hate your job, and you're going to never. There's just no confusion in your mind between these two genres.
When I was younger, I would like pick at my belly button. I know that's really weird, but I was so embarrassed of it. Like, it was just a thing I would do obsessively as like a nervous tick. And I couldn't even like wear a bikini until I was in high school. My belly button was fucked up. Okay. Even like in 4th grade, I told my best friend, I was like, Joanna, like, I have to tell you something. I picked my belly button. She's like, Natalie, I always wondered what you were doing down there. I talked about it on my podcast, and I was really excited. I put it out there. I was like, let's see if anyone relates to this. And then these girls started messaging me. They're like, thank you so much for talking about this. I relate to this. I was like, that's so cool. But then it turns out they weren't women, okay? They were men pretending to be women that wanted to see pictures of my belly button. And it turns out my anxiety is a sexual fetish.
I just want to reiterate that sincere, unrehearsed personal reflections are not stand-up comedy.
I want to give you a palpable example. Let's say you and me sit down in a writer's room. So it's you, me, and 2 other comedians. I said, all right, this week there has been a news story. Donald Trump blames DEI for airplane crashes.
Right.
So we're going to write a film. We're going to write a 1 hour and 30-minute film script here. dealing with DEI, how to counteract systemic racism through hiring practices, affirmative action. We are going to write a comedy dealing with airplane crashes and racism and how this is perceived and misperceived by the left and right. Anyone who sits down in that writer's room and starts talking about their personal experience or their childhood, their feelings of this, say, yeah, guess what, asshole? It's not about you. This script is not about you. When Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, he had never been to Italy. It's not about him. Romeo and Juliet is not about how Shakespeare lost his virginity. It's not. We are writing this script to spec on this topic for this audience. This is what it's about. And there's this sense in which you have to go into the writer's room or go into the creative process, deleting yourself from it. You know, which it's totally, wildly, radically the opposite of what people have become conditioned to accept on Instagram Reels, Instagram monologues, on TikTok, on YouTube, and in podcasts. Like, at a foundational level, the writing process begins with an understanding, this is not about me, this is not about you. This is episode 4 of the History of Comedy podcast, from Appalachian to Zelensky. But in many ways, it's episode 0. And characteristically enough, we are getting rolling with a discussion of comedy in the year 2026. We're starting this with a very future-facing discussion of what's going on in stand-up comedy today, which is ultimately the point of this podcast in going back and re-examining history. The very next episode we do will most likely be about George Bernard Shaw. And it will be an examination of George Bernard Shaw as a comedian, like facing up to the extent to which he made his name and made his mark on history because of comedy and through comedy. Most people don't think of him that way anymore. They don't remember him that way anymore. As even the full title of the podcast indicates, by design, we are going to deal with comedy in ancient Greece. We are going to deal with comedy in ancient Rome. I've done a huge amount of research on the author of the Satyricon, Petronius. This podcast has more research per episode going into it than any other podcast I've recorded before, any other genre of YouTube video I've done before. The number of hours of labor per episode is immense, and I hope you see that when we move forward to those discussions of history, chapter by chapter. However, this is now February 19th of 2025, and as you will have figured out from the title, we're going to talk through an article I just posted or just published. Instagram is destroying stand-up comedy, how not why.
Roll it.
Circa 1994, I saw a good-looking woman get kicked off stage in a branch of Yuck Yucks Toronto, simply for telling a joke that wasn't funny. She was on stage very briefly, but, from memory, after only the second joke, someone backstage pressed the button, and suddenly she was escorted away, as if it were a gong show where the performers could be eliminated at any time. I can remember the joke in detail. Men were like shoes, she explained, and, skipping over some details, she didn't like them with the tongue sticking out. Button pressed, performance over, take no bows, give no outros, hard out. That would never happen today, partly, but not entirely, because she was the best looking woman on stage that night. And, lamentably, we still have a culture built around the bigotry of low expectations.
I'm not sure if you coined this term, the bigotry of low expectations.
No. That's, No, good question. No, I did not coin the term bigotry of low expectations.
2 seconds later.
I can't believe this. This can't possibly be true. The internet claims that the soft bigotry of low expectations was coined by George W. Bush. I think I've got to blame Google for that result. Although he said some things like it, I do not think he's the man who coined it. Okay, so here is the answer. It was crafted by Bush speechwriter Michael Gerson. I'm glad I Googled it. That wasn't my impression at all. So George W. Bush was one of the first people to say it. I think that's the first example of a Bushism that's crept into my writing, YouTube videos, or podcasts. Sorry, do go on.
There you go. Okay, well, glad I asked.
Shout out to George W. Bush. Shout out to George W. Bush, a president who was so terrible that he's now dancing a jig every day, that successive presidents have been such a disaster, that he seems relatively virtuous in retrospect. I mean, I've literally heard conservatives now talking about George W. Bush as the good old days. I'd like to remind you of a very sexy male comedian that we saw in Toronto. And this guy repeatedly drew attention to how attractive he was during his set. He kept on saying, "I'm a good-looking guy. I don't have to put up with this." You remember the guy I'm thinking of? He was all muscled up in a skin-tight t-shirt. And, that might be the single worst performance from any comedian I've ever seen in my life. And paired with the single coldest reaction from the audience, where basically everyone in the audience, except for you and I, it wasn't just that they weren't laughing, but there was that cold gasp of disapproval, just that sense of astonishment and anger and look. You just, I can't even make
that was, I do remember the guy, and I remember the audience actually, there were a pretty decent number of people there. There was a choir group from Buffalo, New York, in visiting.
Right. But that guy, he may not be aware that he's getting by on his looks. He may not be aware the extent to which he is an Instagram hottie and has been for all these years. Now, I'm not saying he's more sexually attractive than me. That's not you understand, that's not my point. But when you look around the room in that very comedy club, of course, his level of physical fitness, his level of physical attraction, compared to the average male stand-up comedian, or you could say compared to each and every other stand-up comedian in the club that night, is extraordinary. He stands out that way. And, it's not the case that the venue manager, that the organizer, the producer of the show, I avoid using this term producer. I think it's deeply dishonest. Talk about any of these shows having a producer or being produced. It's just not true. Okay, well, it's not the case that the executives making the decisions made a deal with this guy. Look, I know you're not very talented and you don't really have any material, but you're attractive, therefore we're giving you a chance. Nobody's reasoning it through in that way. But I wrote this article this morning to talk about the implicit logic, how people are reasoning this through, how it is that this pattern is produced again and again. But the reason I mentioned this guy, nobody kicked him off stage. Nobody cut him short. He was the final act. He was the closer. I referred to him as the headliner to another comedian I talked to after. And that comedian was offended. He said, no, he wasn't the headliner. He was just the comedian who was on last. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it felt like a long set at the end he got there. But he was allowed to just crash and burn and let the flames, just let the silence linger. Nobody kicked him off stage. And that was Yuck Yuck's Toronto. Right?
Yeah, no, it is funny to think of the shows that we've been to and how rarely people are actually booted off stage today.
Yeah. We can mention examples, but, unfortunately, there are exceptions that prove the rule. It's this left-wing thing of kicking someone off stage for daring to use the word tranny instead of transgender. This kind of censorship we've seen ongoing. But, the idea that anyone invigilates the quality of the performance, the idea that anyone is auditioning and having to live up to standards and so on, that's withered away.
Yeah, I was really surprised by a performance in Ottawa that the woman wasn't booted off stage, or that wasn't, given the red light.
Do you want to refresh my memory? Which one you thinking of?
She was reading off of her notebook, and just I the jokes were so bad I kind of don't feel like uttering them, but she went on for much longer than I expected, and it was as though, and I know I do understand sometimes it might be somebody's first performance ever, so you want to be a bit generous and forgiving, but still, if this is one of the most well-known venues in Ottawa, like, you'd think that somebody would have higher standards. But anyway, sorry.
I feel that all of it fits into the culture of self-expression, the culture of personal development, the idea that you're becoming a better person through stand-up comedy in the same way that you supposedly become a better person by talking to your therapist. That's a lot of what's going on beneath the surface, and often enough it's right up on the surface.
There was one performance that I remember in Montreal. That performance was from a very old man that was giving the impression to me, and actually I think that was part of his act, that he's retired. He he doesn't have much else going on, so he's trying to keep his brain active by performing stand-up comedy. I do think that there is this sense that you are building up your self-confidence by getting on stage performing stand-up comedy.
The so-called producers of these shows, the organizers, the impresarios, they say stand-up comedy is for everybody. And it's not. It's for the audience. You know what? Shakespeare is not for everybody. Community theater doing Shakespeare in the park should be illegal. Shakespeare is for actors who are willing to study how to pronounce the lines correctly, with the correct rhythm and meter and accent, etc. They're willing to study the history and understand what the jokes are. So much Shakespeare is performed by actors who literally don't understand the joke they're telling. So they have the emphasis in the wrong place, so they don't understand what the joke is. They don't understand the point of, they don't understand the political point of other passages or religious point and so on. No. It's people who are willing to do that research and do that work. They should perform Shakespeare for an audience that can appreciate it. Period. Shakespeare is not for everybody. Stand-up comedy is not for everybody. But that's the sort of dominant delusion of our times. Look, is yoga for everybody? Everybody sign up for yoga classes and you'll become a better person. Seriously, I think yoga instructors, they vaguely insinuate that you make some kind of spiritual progress by doing yoga, in addition to having a nicer shape of your ass. It's not just about ass. It's not just about your legs. It's not about the muscle tissue in your legs. No. There's something spiritual, some kind of profound personal development involved here. That's exactly what's been going on in stand-up comedy. Indistinguishable. I think there's no difference. Except the audience is expected to pay for it. If yoga classes set up folding seats and started charging admission for an audience to come in, or they started selling alcohol, it would be the same shit. And I gotta tell you, there probably are people who'd like to sit and watch. I'd like to watch you doing yoga. It's probably a bigger audience for that than there is for stand-up comedy these days. All right, next paragraph. In 2026, 1. Venue managers make decisions on the basis of how many Instagram followers a comedian has. And it is venue managers who have taken on the roles abandoned by booking agents, talent agents, and entertainment lawyers, because there simply isn't enough money in the game for a percentage to be paid to any of those people anymore. 2. Success on Instagram and TikTok has absolutely nothing to do with the bare minimum competence, BAMACO, required to be a stand-up comedian. Now, there's a significant digression here that's a significant percentage of the article. But, why does Melissa have potential as a comedian? It's because she's been living the life of the mind for the last 8 years. Like, if you are a person of no substance, with no stories to tell, no life experience we're talking about, what do you really have to offer? Now, look, for some people there is an answer. Some people can say, hey, they're an acrobat and they can do purely physical comedy. I admit there are exceptions to this rule. Some people can say they have an amazing singing voice. You and I have seen that. You and I have seen terrible comedians who've been through performing arts school, and they really can sing, and they really can dance, they really can play instruments. And wow, do they ever need a ghostwriter? Because they can't do any of the creative role, right?
Yeah.
But like,
I remember one in particular in Calgary. He had a background in performing arts, and his actual performance, the way he was speaking, the way he was conducting himself, gesticulating and so on, was good, but the actual quality of the jokes was poor. So that was interesting to see.
Right.
yeah, that's rare, but we've seen that a couple of times where there's a gap between the ability and performance and just even the understanding of what comedy is. In my saying, success on Instagram has nothing to do with the bare minimum competence required to be a stand-up comedian. There could be another article written and another podcast about the maximum comedy. We don't have to only talk about the minimum here, guys. Like what would be exemplary? What would be more than the bare minimum? At the start of this podcast, I warned the audience there will be a future episode about the comedy of George Bernard Shaw. If George Bernard Shaw were alive today, he would be incredibly offended by what I have to say in that podcast. All of this stuff, it's not something new that people have their hearts broken by talking through like the underpinnings of what it takes to succeed in show business or what it takes to be a good writer as opposed to a bad writer. This didn't just start being heartbreaking the day before yesterday. This isn't something people became sensitive to. It's not the case that 100 years ago or 2,000 years ago, people were made out of iron and today they're special snowflakes. This kind of discussion is absolutely inevitably going to be shocking and hurtful and horrifying to the people it's about. Of course people get defensive. Of course they get hurt. I just want to declare that. It's not that I lack sympathy or compassion for the people involved. But what is the more compassionate thing to do? To pretend that someone has talent when they don't? To pretend that something is funny when it isn't? To pretend that something's going to be successful? To delude and flatter people right up to the point where they've lost 10 years of their lives, running off a cliff, and then they finally look down and it all collapses? You and I have seen that. We've seen people who told the same jokes for 10 years. Like we see people who dig themselves deeper and deeper into the same rut for 10 years. And there are always enough people around to pat them on the back and shake their hand and say, good set, and encourage them to keep on doing what they're doing. And even if they have misgivings, even if they have to say, oh, well, I thought the audience, didn't really relate to it. Oh, no, just a tough crowd, just a bad night. Like, no, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Like, what are we talking about here? Just in talking about what does it take to be a comedian? Well, obviously, we're talking about what does it mean to be a writer, really, here. What does it take to write original ideas that are worth reading, worth publishing, worth hearing, worth performing? And this skates pretty close to who you really are, whether or not you have anything to say, anything to contribute to the future of life on planet Earth. Just to come back to George Bernard Shaw as the example, you think that's how he made it as a comedian? Like whatever you want to take as an example of a writer who really came up with original material that mattered to people. That obviously George Bernard Shaw is a great example because what he did, it also mattered to people politically. But, it's about something and it totally reflects the times he lived in. You and I keep doing this. We keep going to stand-up comedy clubs and we walk away and say, whatever the political controversies of the time are, Like we walk away, like, isn't it mind-blowing that we just sat through however many hours of comedy and not a single person was talking about anything that happened this month or this year? You know, like a whole lot of people are talking about a day in high school that traumatized them. It's like this therapy format. A whole lot of people are talking about their childhood and how their father was a doctor, you know, like, and everyone expected them to be a success because their father was a doctor. Like, I've heard so much of this kind of autobiographical material that these people just milk for their whole lives. Oh, is that what Shakespeare did? Is that what George Bernard Shaw did? Whatever. Is that what Apuleius did? We can go back to ancient Greece. Is that what Terence did? Spend your whole life milking these self-centered, self-indulgent, self-pitying anecdotes.
Yes, and I remember we went to an event where you did ask, not that involves, but you did ask the question, you know, why is it that these comedians don't mention anything political, and specifically Donald Trump. And I remember one comedian answered by saying that those jokes got worn out, that it's just, you know, Donald Trump has been in the news for so long that people don't... I found that answer weak, because even if it is the case that, you know, you are burnt out talking about Donald Trump, like, the audience is not. Like, the audience still needs that comic relief, and that's a big role of comedy, is that we need some sort of commentary that binds us, you know, as an audience. Whereas, you know, yeah, I'm sure all of us had some sort of bad incident in high school that they might relate to, you know, they might relate to the comedian's trauma from high school, but that's just not really useful compared to talking about current political situation in New York City. You know, that was where we were talking to the...
I think the fantasy for that particular comedian, I remember the guy you're talking about, is that he would have a connection with the audience. He would find his people by telling the same stories over and over again. You know, it's just not fresh material. It's not original writing. It's not material. While interspersing it with so-called crowd work, insulting the audience. That's kind of the excuse that accompanies. Again, that's the reality. He doesn't have any material about Donald Trump because he doesn't have any material he wrote within the last year. You know, but what is new, and he did it to me. He tried to insult me repeatedly in the audience. I was myself a target of this crowd. You know, is to then mix it up with, you know, this very strange sideshow, literally and figuratively, of insulting members of the audience. Is that how Ben Jonson got ahead? Is that how Shakespeare got ahead? Is that how, you know?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I mean,
You didn't say that at the time. Like, well, okay, think of these famous writers of the past, you know, famous comedians of the past. Is that what they did? It's a very, I think, a useful way to view comedy in this day and age.
Wow, you're so... It's not that it... Wow, look at you.
Yeah.
I could leave right now if
Well,
I
I
wanted.
can roast you too. You can't just roast all of us and get nothing.
Whoa!
Is that
I see. So you were afraid because, like, you felt like I was saying your name.
I can take the mic if you want.
It's okay, he's your new friend.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I have plenty of material that's embarrassing for you. Let's move on. Small dick energy, let's clap for him. I will say this, like, it is such a hard time in this world right now. There's so many people that came together to be supportive and fucking amazing, and you're putting fucking look me in the eyes. You're putting negative fucking energy out here. This is the last show of my fucking, look me in the fucking eye. It's the last show of my fucking weekend. It's a sold out show, and you want to say mean shit to me, okay? So don't fucking do that.
Fuck yeah!
You can leave.
If you don't like it, get the fuck out.
You can leave.
Levitate.
Leave! Can I have a drink, please?
Let's do a fucking shot.
Heckling is stupid. If we can all agree that heckling is stupid, we can agree that mutual heckling is stupid. Heckling back and forth in the audience.
2 seconds later.
Let's have a brief digression on exactly what that Bamako is, just to say the bare minimum competence required. 1, write original material. 2, rehearse original material. 3, select from, adapt, and perform that material for the particular audience. There are comedians here who are unbelievably terrible, consistently showing up with no material at all. They have neither written jokes nor anything else. They just narrate spontaneously off the tops of their heads. In both form and content, a lot of this sounds like it was performed for a therapist originally, not an audience. I cannot count the number of times I've heard a comedian lament after a flop, "My therapist thought that was really funny." Is that what's holding you back, Melissa, that you don't have a therapist you're paying that you can rehearse your material for? No? Your therapist is someone you are paying to pretend to be your friend. Your therapist is someone you're paying to pretend they're interested in what you have to say. That's got to be just about the worst way to rehearse your material as a comedian. I would say hanging out in an old folks home is better, probably. Volunteering in an old folks home, better than therapy for this purpose. All right, continue reading. It would be one thing to kick them off stage. It would be another thing to ban them from the club forever. There is the very real option of saying to them, quote, "You can come back only when you've written and rehearsed new material," which is something very different from an improvised autobiographical monologue. The irony is that I am extremely experienced at improvised autobiographical monologues and have had more success with that art form than any of these comedians ever have had or ever will. But I recognize that it is not stand-up comedy, and it is basically insulting to the audience to lapse into precisely that same kind of monologue that I managed to rack up 8 million views on YouTube with. Now, pause. If I upload a monologue talking about my childhood, people listen to it while they're doing the dishes. Like, I'm not delusional. There are some people who would be interested in hearing me talk about my childhood, going to school, whatever, struggles with teachers and principals or conflicts with parents. There are some people who would be interested in hearing that. Not at a nightclub. Not paying admission at a nightclub and then sitting in a chair facing the stage and not being able to do anything else. It is just fundamentally different what we're talking about here. There's one performance that, particularly scars me for life, and you weren't there for this one. This guy told this long story. I mean, this is over 15 minutes about, his own childhood as a literally mentally disabled person and what his diagnoses were and what his symptoms were and going in to see the psychiatrist and whatever. This is 15 minutes. Now, the performance is terrible. There's absolutely nothing interesting about it. It's totally self-indulgent. I don't even know if your therapist would sit there and listen to this terrible monologue. But I'm sitting there and it's like, for me, I'm actually a master of this art form. But even I can realize it's inappropriate and it's insulting to the audience when they have paid money and come to a nightclub and sat down. Most of them have bought alcohol or whatever, to inflict this upon them. Even if you are good enough at that kind of monologue to perform it as a podcast, perform it as a YouTube video, and have a whole 1,000 people who care, which is way more than the people sitting there. And guess what? The 1,000 people who would have clicked on that YouTube video back when I had a YouTube channel, or 1,000 people who would eventually hear the podcast if I upload a podcast that they don't know, they will listen to it for free while washing the dishes or while going jogging and being able to press the pause button, and they will listen to it knowing that's what they signed up for from the title of the description. Oh, okay, this is this guy Zell talking about his childhood and his critique of education or whatever, his critique of his own parents. Okay, that's what they chose to listen to. And that is not what anyone paid for who came to this comedy club tonight. And look, ultimately, of course, it's not about money. It's about time and suffering. That is not what these people set aside an hour for to suffer through. All right? Come on, take it away. Come on, it's not just me here. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, people have lives and they come to be entertained, and most of the performances that we've been to, the audience was there to laugh, and they were good sports about it. But yeah, I just having to sit through some of those performances was painful. And like most of the time people are paying to actually be in the club. They have to pay for 2 drink minimum, maybe have to order some kind of food item like just so that they can sit in the audience. And it is an insult to the audience, their intelligence, their time, and also to the art form in general. I feel like that's kind of insulting to what comedy is supposed to be. And I have sat through like many hours of hearing you monologue on YouTube, and I understand that most of the time people are just doing it while doing other chores, folding clothes. It's true. So
some people are listening in a Russian prison cell right now after fighting in the civil war in Ukraine. For example, go on. Some of my biggest fans are listening from a prison in Russia right now. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, I do understand that you are, definitely one of the best YouTubers that got very, very proficient in this sort of unrehearsed personal reflection monologue, and I've gotten to see so many people bomb trying to do what they've seen on YouTube, I guess. Probably not your performances, but other people's performances on YouTube. And yeah, you have to admit, a lot of people, they get interested in somebody on YouTube because they have a crush on them. They, they think that they're good looking. They like something about them. And so they want to know more about the person's life. They just, maybe they don't actually have the option of starting some sort of relationship with that person, but they have this parasocial relationship because, they see this person, they like them for whatever reason. So some people choose to commit hours of their lives listening to the personal history of a YouTuber.
This is a mass phenomenon, and most people in the audience will assume we're talking about incels. Most people will assume we're talking about men and women who are currently celibate, currently single, not having sex, on happy with it. But I think the majority of people in this category are married.
Yeah.
The audience for Doomed Republic right now, my other podcast that's lately been talking about ancient Greece and Rome, there are married women listening to that and listening to you and I talking to each other. And they are wistfully thinking how different their lives would be if they had married a real intellectual who sits around and talks about ancient Greece and ancient Rome instead of the hockey game, instead of the football game, etc. And I've got to tell you something. My experience is that the majority of my audience is married women with precisely that kind of wistful pretension. That there's a better life they could have lived, or there's a better life they could be living now if they were with a man more like me. I don't approve. I don't celebrate it. But obviously, that pattern plays out with a million variations on the internet and through podcasts and through YouTube videos. It's going to include women who maybe married a guy who's an intellectual, a guy who can talk to them about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but they wish they had married a guy who was a fitness instructor, a guy who was a yoga instructor, a guy who looks like this guy on Instagram. It's going to include all kinds of paradoxical fantasies. I think the majority of it is people who are getting laid, not incels, who develop this kind of fascination, and then they're finding what you have to say about your life a little bit too interesting. They're a little bit too interested in your boring stories about your childhood, that, whatever it is you're monologuing about, because of that kind of crush that you're describing. I want to say about you, Melissa, you have been on the other side of this equation. You have made comedy videos, and several of them were hit, successful comedy videos. And you have made separately at least one video complaining that you hate your job and you're going to quit. Not the job you currently have, the job you did quit at that time. All right?
Yeah.
So one of those is a completely scripted, rehearsed, professional performance. It is comedy. It is for the audience. It is about a topic. It's making a point, And the other is an autobiographical monologue, and it has a kind of searing intensity and sincerity and emotion to it. And it would be ruined if it were scripted. It would be ruined if it were rehearsed. I'm thinking of that video where you just said, look, I hate my job so much, I'm going to quit after only one day. It's the realest thing in the world. That's why I got on YouTube in the first place. I love that genre, right? But it's not comedy. And there is no way you would get on the microphone at a nightclub with people paying $20 a ticket to sit down. It's such a ripoff. A lot of these go $20 a ticket for 1 hour of entertainment. So if it's two people, it's $40 US. Terrible. But whatever. Whether it's a free show or a $20 show, they come, they pay for parking, they take hours out of their life, they sit down, they buy alcohol, which incidentally causes brain damage. Hashtag quit drugs, hashtag quit everything. They're getting the brain damage and paying all this money. You would never get on stage and then do a free-form autobiographical monologue about how much you hate your job, and you're going to never. There's just no confusion in your mind between these two genres.
No, and I recognize that if I get on stage, I will have had to have written jokes. I will have had to rehearse them. If it's just in front of the mirror, it's just in front of the mirror, but rehearse them before you get on stage, and, also anticipate that it's possible you'll, bomb, you'll flop, and you have to try again. Yeah, it has been surprising to actually be at the events and realize that.
Right. After coronavirus ended and I got back involved with stand-up comedy, the bizarre irony for me was all these people are trying to do what I am already good at and I am already successful at on YouTube, and they suck. And somehow they do this again and again, and they watch their own video back. They're all recording themselves and watching the performance back, and they hear the audience reaction, and they can't figure out that they suck at it. The other point we already made, even if you were really great at it, it's just grossly insulting to the audience. It's just inappropriate as stand-up comedy. Whether you tell it to your therapist or you tell it to your podcast audience or whatever, what you and I are doing right now is not stand-up comedy, guys. It's just...
No, absolutely not. And I will just say there does seem to be this sort of mindset amongst the comedians of embracing how bad their performance is. They are, in effect, self-aware of how bad it is, but they still get up on stage and do the same performance. And we saw in New York, we'd see the same comedians at different venues performing the same material, even though they were acknowledging in the performance that we already had seen from them that it didn't go well. It's like they had prepared to say that, hey, I know this is not going well, but I'm going to keep up with it.
I want to give you a palpable example. Let's say you and me sit down in a writer's room. So it's you, me, and two other comedians. I could give examples, people we know. I said, all right, this week there has been a news story. Donald Trump blames DEI for airplane crashes.
Right.
So we're going to write a film. We're going to write a 1 hour and 30-minute film script here dealing with DEI, how to counteract systemic racism through hiring practices, affirmative action. We are going to write a comedy dealing with airplane crashes and racism and how this is perceived and misperceived by the left and right. Anyone who sits down in that writer's room and starts talking about their personal experience or their childhood, their feelings of this, say, yeah, guess what, asshole? It's not about you. This script is not about you. When Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, he had never been to Italy. It's not about him. Romeo and Juliet is not about how Shakespeare lost his virginity. It's not. You can't even make an inference about his sex life or romantic experience. We are writing this script to spec on this topic for this audience. This is what it's about. And there's this sense in which you have to go into the writer's room or go into the creative process, deleting yourself from it. Which it's totally, wildly, radically the opposite of what people have become conditioned to accept on Instagram Reels, Instagram monologues, on TikTok, on YouTube, and in podcasts. Like at a foundational level, the writing process begins with an understanding, this is not about me, this is not about you. I'll continue the article here.
Yeah.
Sincere, unrehearsed political reflections are not stand-up comedy. They may be interesting to an audience on YouTube if you've led an interesting enough life, or if you've got enough intellectual substance, or some kind of intriguing political ambition. And this is absolutely never true of any of these comedians. They uniformly lack all three. Still, not Bamako, not comedy.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate that. Sincere, unrehearsed personal reflections are not stand-up comedy. And yeah, you are absolutely right. I have made sincere, unrehearsed personal reflection videos, and I recognize that that was not stand-up comedy. I know the difference between the scripted performances that were intended to be comedy. So it is this... Yeah, this is definitely a change, I would think. And we watched a film that starred Tom Hanks. To me, that seemed to be a different era of stand-up comedy, where although the comedians were joking about various aspects of their real life, there were jokes. They had prepared and actually, created something that the audience would find entertaining, as opposed to just the audience would only find this entertaining if they find you attractive.
Right. I have a book here. I was planning to have an episode of this podcast reviewing it. And it's a book about the golden age of stand-up comedy in the 1980s, which is the period of time you're alluding to here with Tom Hanks. And I think the most intriguing element to deal with in a podcast is how it is that we have come to perceive comedy as having a golden age at all, right? That there was a golden age and now it's over. That's already quite interesting to kind of reflect on and analyze. But the interesting thing is, in reading a primary source from that era, everyone in the 1980s was in the shadow of the 1960s. And they were looking back to the 1960s, as the golden age. And that's when all this stuff was done for the first time. They were aware that they were trapped in a sort of derivative art form. And they were really recycling things that were done for the first time in the 1960s.
I know you have a separate podcast that, Nihilism Now. But still, I do think you have to take a nihilistic approach to comedy as well. Why is it that I do agree with your statement that sincere, unrehearsed personal reflections are not stand-up comedy, but we have to question why that is, and we have to question why we tend to think that the 1980s is, compared to where we are in 2025, why that is actually comedy, whereas what's happening today is something different.
I think it's fair to say that the level of honesty that's now possible on social media destroys the standard expectations for stand-up comedy that existed in the 1960s. Like, the level of censorship that existed on the radio, for television, in newspapers in the 1960s meant that an audience just hearing a man talk about masturbation was a shocking thrill. Now, I've got to tell you, one of the reasons I despise people like Natalie Cuomo, they pretend they are unaware that what they are doing is largely kind of sexually titillating the audience. And again, in the 1960s, like, there were people who had never heard the word blowjob said out loud that way before. Or, this huge gap, between what construction workers say on the job and reality as represented in film, television, radio, newspapers. So just to see a man, but even more so to see a good-looking woman talking about blowjobs and the struggle to keep her husband satisfied, or masturbation. Okay, so I'm pointing out, this was a strength in the 1960s, and it's a weakness today. The absence of censorship has revealed the banality of stand-up comedy in that 1960s through 1980s mold, right? Like, the golden age of comedy, when you look back on it today, none of it's funny, none of it's interesting, none of it has aged well. Yeah, I said it. Now, in parallel, I've said this many times, for me as a child, hearing Chris Rock talk about racism was so thrilling. I grew up in a community that was very deeply racially divided. Nobody was allowed to talk about it. Nobody was allowed to talk about the hostility and violence and danger and resentment and what was going on that way. And then to hear Chris Rock talk about it, even for 2 sentences, it was so funny, it was so cathartic, it was so liberating. Again, footnote, I was a child. Okay? So just say, on a massive scale in the 1960s, that kind of taboo, racial politics, religious politics, sex is really 9/10 what we're talking about here. But still, in the other 10%, racism and religion and what have you, right, there was a lot there to kind of decompress. There was a lot of kind of pent-up anguish that was concealed by censorship. But that's over.
That's a very good point. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Pent up anguish. Yes. As a result of censorship. Yeah, no, I just wanted to I just wanted to interrupt you and talk about, the banality of what's covered in stand-up comedy, even though today we do have so much more honesty, so to speak, in talking and reflecting on masturbation, on, pleasing your husband, wife, than what was in the, public lexicon in the 1960s, for example. Yeah, but when I was growing up, 2 comedians that were really popular were Jim Gaffigan and Dane Cook. And hey, I may go back and look at those and actually find some political humor, but the main thing I remember is, Jim Gaffigan joking in a silly voice about Hot Pockets. Hot Pocket, the food, frozen food item sold in the United States. It's just
Hot Pockets. Hot Pockets, yeah.
This is what it got to, just talking in the 2000s, 2000s, 2010s. This is the level of commentary on daily life in the United States, and that's during the period that the United States is, has military deployed in the Middle East, and nobody's making stand-up comedy about this. Nobody is making a comedic film about that. So yeah, just say
the incongruous contrast has always been there for people to notice, because South Park was taking on real political questions of the time maybe not every episode, but at least once a month, at least 1 out of 4, we're taking on hard-hitting, serious political questions. Now, I'm actually not a fan of South Park. I've seen very few episodes, and the episodes I saw were accidental. It was like the equivalent of, seeing a movie on an airplane kind of thing. I never planned to watch the show. I was never a fan of the show. But they had an episode that was criticizing left-wing people for being morally opposed to Starbucks, to big coffee chains, that left-wing people think it's somehow more ethical to go to a small coffee shop, a small independently owned business. Now, I've got to tell you something. That's still relevant today. And it's not easy to take on from a comedic perspective. Like, it's not easy comedy to write or to pull off. They took on numerous or innumerable political topics this way. But, everyone remembers that they took on Scientology. Everyone knows that they took on Mormonism. But, many of the sort of smaller, more subtle and nuanced political quandaries and moral quandaries of their time, they wrote comedy, confronting them. So that was going on mainstream television during this era. So, again, unlike the 1960s, right? And just being real, today, I do not know of any comedian that even lives up to what you could kind of call the South Park standard that way. I don't think South Park is setting the bar too high. Like, you can outdo South Park in virtue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now we start naming names. The problem with Natalie Cuomo is not merely that she is not funny. She demonstrates how Instagram is destroying stand-up comedy. There's a surreal sense in which she isn't even trying to be funny. She is trying to be famous on Instagram and doing absolutely none of the bare minimum things required to be a comedian. This is the comedic equivalent of a sexually attractive man posing near nude with a basketball on Instagram, and then touring basketball courts for small audiences because they relate to his combination of sex appeal and autobiographical reflections on the app. Sorry, I'm in mid-sentence here, breaking off. But that is always what Instagram has offered. It's not just nudity. It's not just the body, right? It's the body and the personality and the pettiest of reflections on this person's daily life, what they ate today. This is the true parasocial relationship. It's not just the shape of your ass. That should be actually their corporate motto. Instagram, it's not just the shape of your ass. Reminder, this is a podcast about comedy. It's not comedy. This is not comedy, people. Okay. Continue my sentence here. But he doesn't actually play basketball. He isn't sinking his time and energy into the sport's own Bamako. That has certainly happened with women, by the way. There have certainly been female athletes who really don't play the sport, who really aren't impressive athletically. It's these other elements of the parasocial relationship that catapult them to fame and success. All right. Am I only going to take it halfway? No. I'm going to give it to you raw. We go all the way in this article on this podcast. Quote, I am not going to tell you that 90% of Natalie Cuomo's success is a result of her sex appeal. I am going to argue that it's a solid 100%. And worse, that sex appeal is cycled through several successive stages of commercialization that seem to have corrupted the already corrupt process of auditioning that stand-up comedy is supposedly built upon. Yeah, I said it. Auditioning. In New York City, absolutely nobody auditions anymore. Comedians are expected to hang with other comedians, who then give them the pass for a particular club. Comedians who know comedians get passed, in quotation marks. This is used as both a verb and a noun, and are then regarded as approved in advance for performance on that stage or at a cluster of associated clubs. This entails a cyclone of cocaine and bisexual girlfriends who know that they can socialize with the right people, not even necessarily needing to sleep with the right people, to gain access to time on stage. And straight men play the same game of seducing other straight men by the same rules. The Eiffel Tower is not just a tourist attraction in France. If you want to do this thing, you need to be writing all the time. You need to be generating material every day. And I'm not saying you only need to write jokes that can be performed on stage. You can be working on a film. You can be working on a book. You can be working on 6 different projects at the same time. But you need to be living the life of the mind. And I've never met anyone playing this game, anyone involved in stand-up comedy in any of the roles that now exist, who hesitates at losing like 8 hours by hanging around the club before the show starts, getting drunk, getting high, doing drugs, and possibly flirting with people trying to get laid. After the performance ends, they're still at the club, getting drunk, getting high, possibly trying to get laid. They go on to another party at another venue, whether that's in someone's apartment or what have you. The number of hours it would take for you to write a film script, for you to be working on a film, again, at a lower level, a YouTube video, anything of real substance. Like, if you're leading the life of the mind, if you're someone who has what it takes to be a comedy writer, you would be very reluctant to part with a whole night of your life this way. To ruin your sleep and wake up hungover the next day. You would be very reluctant to lose all these hours of your life and your potential, both as a reader and as a writer. And of course, guess what? 10 years go by. Who do you become? If this is your life in and out of nightclubs, who do you become? Well, you become somebody who doesn't have any stories to tell. You don't become a great writer or a great intellectual or a great comedian. You become an old barfly.
Damn. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and I saw it in the clubs myself, and just some of the self-referential humor, of comedians is just, hey, we're a bunch of losers performing at this stand-up comedy club, but we keep doing it, and the people keep coming, it's just, and they don't have higher ambition for actually writing new material. I mean, we've seen stand-up comedians where we saw a video of their performance, which had taken place 10 years ago, and then when we saw them that night, they were performing the same jokes. So, yeah, it's and I, one thing that, you said when we were in Las Vegas is, really seems like Las Vegas is the place comedy goes to die. And it's like the museumification of comedy. Once something is in a museum, that means that it's no longer, a thriving, active culture. It means like that culture is dead. That's being put into a museum.
Further, once people are living in that cycle, what do they have to write about? Troy Bond, right?
I had a bad drinking problem. I've had a drug problem my whole life. I started smoking crack at 15, and I'm going to just say we were too hard on Hunter Biden. If my dad was Joe Biden, I would smoke crack too.
His early career, he was talking about his father's death. His father had died. Well, that's not going to happen twice. Okay, I get it. You have a certain amount of material because of your father's death. All these comedians, they're mining childhood anecdotes. I wouldn't do it. I think it's ridiculous. But anyway. Okay. And then after a certain point, all that Troy Bond has to talk about is his life as a successful comedian, sleeping with his fans, sleeping with groupies, sleeping with women out of the audience. And sometimes, understand, the anecdote is about not sleeping with them. You meet this woman and talk to her, and then you don't sleep with her. His material about a fan of his who got a tattoo of his name. So that's the process becomes the product. And some of them are honest about the cocaine, some are not. Some of them are honest about the drugs, whatever the drugs are they're using. But guys, drugs are not a minor footnote in this cycle. So you're largely looking at people, again, look, sex is not for everybody, okay? Not everybody has sex multiple times a day. Not everybody has sex multiple times a week. Not everybody has sex multiple times a month. The variation in human, sexual behavior is extreme. But you know what? If you do drugs, everybody gets the same brain damage. The susceptibility to a drug like cocaine and the brain damage done by drinking whiskey. People talk about tolerance to alcohol. That's just behavior. One person may be able to behave like he's sober when he's drunk, and another person can't. Guess what? Brain damage is the same. Damaging your brain, damaging your liver, damaging your whole body. You live it, and you are losing time. That's the pattern. I remember the oldest. Someone is going to write in and say that I'm jealous of Troy Bond. If you criticize someone, it must be motivated by jealousy, right? But as people step into this cycle, and again, the crucial first step is this business of hanging, the hang. I mean, I've heard that used a lot as a noun by comedians. Oh, he's good for a hang. He's a good hang.
Yeah, I've heard that in another comedian's podcast. I've heard that.
You and I have done it accidentally just a couple of times. Sometimes the hang is at the comedy club after the audience has left.
Yeah, after the audience has left, you can talk to certain people that are still there, and
And there's alcohol. There's alcohol there. There's a bar there or whatever, and the comedians just stay.
And there's cocaine there. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're really cool, maybe they go into another venue after that, but maybe not. The left wingers tend to hang at the club. But anyway, okay, so this is a process that begins, with the hang, vetting people. It has nothing to do with your talent. It has nothing to do with your material. And then again, so is the hang a means to an end? My famous line, a technique is a trap. You thought you were doing this just to get your foot in the door, but it devours your whole life.
And I just wanted to add too, I know it's not because you're jealous of Natalie Cuomo that you're criticizing her here. I mean, I could ask you why it is, but I think I already know. But no, I think that the people who have gossiped about you online in terms of your stand-up career or your interest in stand-up comedy or your reasoning for attending stand-up comedy events, they are jealous of you. And I don't know if it's because it could be comedians that are jealous of you for basically having the nihilistic attitude that you do toward comedy because they really believe in it, and they may not be able to conceptualize that or say that, but to me, I just see these are true believers in this lifestyle and this sort of mode that they have gotten into of attending these events, performing, and that has become their life. Whereas you are an outsider who has considered, getting into, making a comedy routine and performing it, but at this stage, you are a critic. You are a critic of what you've seen, and I think that irks them. They're like, hey, this is something that people do that they believe in, and what gives you the right to have this sort of critical attitude, yeah.
The single most successful comedian in the history of the English language is Shakespeare. I'm not jealous of Shakespeare. Are you? Do you feel jealous about Shakespeare?
No, I don't think so.
Let's keep it all real. People are not jealous of what other people do. People are not jealous of what other people have. People are not jealous of other people's accomplishments. Okay? People are jealous of me because of who I am. Period. And to what extent they understand that and to what extent they perceive that is a whole different question. But that's it. That's what human jealousy is. It's other people feeling, I want to be you. Okay? The reason why I'm not jealous of other comedians and the reason why I'm not jealous of Shakespeare is that what I want to do is something that has never been done before. So I'm not jealous of anybody who's accomplished anything that's already happened. Because the art form I'm pursuing and the political change I'm pursuing is something genuinely new. It's not imitative of anyone or anything that's come before. That's why I don't experience jealousy for any of this shit. I don't want to be Natalie Cuomo, and I don't want to be Troy Bond. But also, I'm not trying to accomplish what they already have. That's where I'm at.
I stormed the Capitol. You stormed the Capitol? You stormed the Capitol? Stormed the Capitol. Stormed it. You didn't even vote, Kramer. No, I was down there trying to get a pardon for my friend, Bob Sacramento. You know, he worked with the Tiger King, Jerry. And I thought we were looking for a bathroom. I just twisted around. Hey, Kramer, what pronouns do you use?
I do see potential in Troy Bond. I think he could accomplish something better, something positive, something great. But he has to be the actor, not the writer. And that's very hard for people to deal with. Because the whole ego trip of 21st century stand-up comedy is you get on stage and you just be yourself. This is who I really am. This is my real experience, blah, blah, blah. They don't think of it like Shakespeare. They don't think, I'm going to write a play about a sword fight in Italy. I've never been to Italy. I've never been in a sword fight. They don't think that. Shakespeare married an older woman. I'm just saying, he didn't, whatever. Shakespeare's actual sex life, his actual experience has nothing to do with what's in these plays. Shakespeare decides to write his own take on the death of Julius Caesar in ancient Rome. Also his take on Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And it's shocking. What he does is really ballsy and really original. I mean, if you really understand the politics of what was going on at the time and the statement Shakespeare was making in those plays, he had balls, man, Shakespeare. He was really taking risks, He doesn't know a goddamn thing about ancient Rome. So I'll just say, Shakespeare was doing something original, even when he was working with historical sources as raw materials. And why am I saying this? Because Troy Bond has never done anything like that in his fucking life, and Natalie Cuomo has never done anything like that in her fucking life, and they never will. But yeah, again, I got love for these people in the sense that I see potential in them. But tragically, they're going to have to accept that their potential is only as an actor, not as a writer. Which nobody wants to believe. Guess what? Chris Farley believed it. He made hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, if you add up with Chris Farley, most of the money's generated after he died. But you want to know what Shrek was worth? You want to know what Chris Farley's library of film? Well, hey, he could have insisted on being a true artist and only performing his own material that he wrote himself. Where would that have gotten him? It takes some self-knowledge and pragmatism. But, what do you want? Not everyone can be Shakespeare.
First off, I am 35 years old. I am divorced, and I live in a van down by the river. You're gonna be doing a lot of doobie rolling when you're living in a van down by the river.
Chris Farley, that's an interesting example. Definitely thinking of some sketches from Saturday Night Live that I'm sure he didn't write. He didn't write that character, but he did a damn good job performing that character.
Do you want to know? I'm going to tell you right now. I happen to know this one. Do you know who wrote the famous line, "in a van down by the river"? Because it wasn't Chris Farley. Do you want to guess who wrote that? If you don't study, if you don't stay in school, if you don't work hard, you are going to end up living in a van down by the river. This is one of the lines that made Chris Farley. Can you guess who wrote that sketch? Bob Odenkirk.
Oh, okay.
The man who would later be the lawyer named Saul on Better Call Saul. Bob Odenkirk, who went on to have this bizarre career, he was the one writing out of his life experience this very memorable character, the motivational speaker who screams at you, you're gonna know. Right? That's not Chris Farley's voice. That's not his perspective. That's not his experience. He's not that kind of, sensitive, fragile kind of guy that would write. Well, Bob Odenkirk was, at least that stage of his life, right? Okay, what a concept. Performing material someone else has written. Whoa, really? This is a breakthrough, guy. Man. 21st century. 2026. We're talking about the future. 2026, people. Okay? All right.
2 seconds later.
Venue managers do not audition comedians as people, and they do not evaluate the material to be performed in specific before a show. There is an unspeakable desperation of comedians to hang with anyone who can get them a pass to a better club than the one they're performing in now. The role of the talent agent has been supplanted by a decentralized system of sex, drugs, and rock and roll conferring legitimacy. I really wonder why high schools have not replaced university entrance exams with a similar system, frankly. As much less hard work and talent are required to take notes while some moron sermonizes his way through your BA. Presumably, one student can simply confer a pass upon another on the basis of how they all hang, with equal rigor and equally predictable outcomes. Obviously, this is a system of cool kids deciding who is cool enough to hang out with them. That's all that it is. The reason why we don't choose who gets to become a surgeon on this basis is that we'd rather have someone who's uncool, who's not a member of the clique, who's not a member of the gang, but who can actually perform surgery well. This is the reason why university entrance exams don't work this way, so on and so forth. So I am drawing attention to the inevitable downward spiral that results from this spontaneously arisen system of having comedians approve of other comedians, give them the pass, give them the stamp, give them the badge, so that they also can perform at that club. It's partly a problem of corruption, but I mean, it is partly just a system that is designed to fail. And what do you know? Who is the coolest of them all? The people who are already commodifying their sexuality on Instagram.
Yeah. That is true. That is really what I was seeing when we went to New York City, for example. And yeah, it does seem to be whoever has the social media following. That's who has legitimacy. And it's not that people on Instagram, it's not that they are, that they have the Bamako, just because they have a lot of followers on Instagram. I don't want to get too much into the vegan movement and talking about this, but, people in the vegan movement, they know who Dr. Michael Greger is. They know his YouTube channel, nutritionfacts.org. Do they know much else about his life? I don't mean to be too judgmental, but he is not a sex symbol. He does not go on Instagram and show off his body on the beach. He has a role, and that's his role. That's it. Okay? And nobody really wants to know more about his private life, his personal life. They want to know what his advice is on how to be healthy. By contrast, Tess Begg. Tess Begg dropped out of high school so that she could be a YouTuber showing the food that she eats. It is just because she was an attractive young woman that she got the following that she did. So if somebody were to invite either Dr. Michael Greger or Tess Begg to perform at a stand-up comedy event, yeah, it would be Tess Begg. She has way more followers, and there is a sex appeal that appeals. Her sex appeal is what will bring people to the club to see the person performing, even if she doesn't have any material. Sorry if this is too silly of an example here. I just think I was definitely seeing this at stand-up comedy events. If somebody had a following on Instagram, they were more likely to either get more time on stage or to actually get on stage at all.
I think there's a mismatch between the expectations of the audience and the expectations of the performers here. Because the audience, even if they know your name from Instagram, when they go to a comedy show, they have expectations that do not come from Instagram, right? If we're being honest, even if something is good enough to be a TikTok reel, to be a hit in some other format that they listen to while doing the dishes for free, when the audience comes to a comedy show, they have expectations that are created by Sesame Street, that are created by the Muppets, that are created by comedy they started seeing in early childhood, both sketch comedy and long-form narrative comedy. They have expectations created by South Park and The Simpsons and The Family Guy and long format, hour and a half comedy. And their expectations are only formed in small part by HBO comedy specials from people like Chris Rock. Only in small part. But if they have seen Chris Rock do 1 hour solid on HBO, that's bad news for you, homeboy, because that is the expectation they're showing up with. Not what they got from a 30-second reel on Instagram, and not what they got from a pretty girl in a bikini on Instagram. So I actually think in this respect, the system is set up to fail, and it's failing right now again and again and again. I think weekend after weekend, audiences show up, and they see comedians who are selected because of their Instagram following and because they've been hanging out with other comedians, sex, drugs, and parties, getting them on stage, getting this kind of approval from these clubs. And they suck relative to the audience's expectations. I'll just be real with you. I think it's actually very rare for people from the audience to talk about that. Everyone shows up and wants to be positive and encouraging to the performers. Very few people walk out and say to you, look, that wasn't what I was expecting at all.
Yeah, you're right. I guess I can think of one time when we saw the same audience member at another location, and I think I remember them saying that their experience at that other location was terrible. But most of the time, people, they come to a show, they might bring a girlfriend on a date. They're just trying to have some sort of activity to do with a friend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever, a family member, maybe family's in town and you want to do something together. So you go to stand-up comedy, and like they want to show, whoever they're with a good time. And then they're disappointed. And it just relies on the fact that most of the major cities that we've been to, people just come in from out of town and they're probably not going to be back. But still, they get enough new people coming in and needing something to do. I do think it is disappointing to the audience, and you're probably right that their expectations are built up on the television shows that they saw growing up, movies, comedic, Family Guy, so on.
Let's just say there's a beautiful woman I've seen on Instagram, and I'm very impressed with her. She's very sexy. She's very athletic. And then I hear she's going to star in a kung fu movie.
Yeah.
I'm paying money to see a kung fu movie. I have expectations based on other kung fu movies, other action movies in that genre. And again, the audience, they may not have even examined those expectations fully. But I am not showing up at the theater and paying $15 to sit down and spend an hour and a half. I am not paying to see TikTok level monologues, Instagram reel level monologues. It doesn't matter how sexually attractive she is. Does not matter. And obviously I'm suggesting that this has a knock-on effect in other media where people are producing terrible movies with the hope that they'll make money and attract an audience because there's a beautiful woman or a handsome man who already has this following. And look, real talk, however many people listen to my boring podcasts talking about politics and history and ancient Greece and ancient Rome, that audience doesn't in any way translate to lower expectations for me as a stand-up comedian performing live, nor as a musician, as a rapper doing satire, a parody. No. So just one does not transfer to the other. And this is worth saying out loud because most people think that it does. Like most people really are deceived on this point, including people making the decisions. Venue managers may not notice that none of these people are doing the work, the Bamako work, to actually have new material to offer. But they will notice the number of empty seats. Thus, Instagram becomes the crucial lubricant, and this has ramifications far beyond the cozy confines of New York cocktail parties. Natalie Cuomo has over 1 million followers on Instagram. As with Freelee, years before, many of these followers are women who respond to Natalie Cuomo's sex appeal with a strange spirit of imitation, wanting to be like her, whereas others are men who are directly aroused by her content. Natalie Cuomo is not attractive to me personally, and I do not find her autobiographical anecdotes arousing, nor interesting, nor funny. But I can see the difference between a barfly and the broadside of a barn. My extremely eccentric taste in women is irrelevant to this discussion. Natalie Cuomo offers the intoxicating mix of the relatable and the unattainable. Her very mediocrity is a positive part of her appeal. However, if she had been 50 pounds fatter consistently for the last 10 years, would anyone in their right mind think that this level of success would have been attained by her? 20 pounds? 10? Freelee, same question. I just want to pause on this point. What if Bob Odenkirk had been 50 pounds fatter? What if Bob Odenkirk had been 20 pounds fatter? What if Bob Odenkirk had been 10 pounds fatter? If your success as a writer, as a creative artist, as a filmmaker, as a comedian, if your success wouldn't really have been changed very much by gaining 20 pounds of fat, that's a good sign. If your success absolutely relied on you being able to show off your body, male or female, right? If your success would have been ruined by being 20 pounds fatter, 50 pounds fatter, right? That's a bad sign. And look, obviously, Natalie Cuomo has her fans. I don't think a single one of her fans would claim that her success, her reaching 1 million followers on Instagram, would be possible if she were just 20 pounds fatter during this time. I don't think any of her fans are that delusional. So, the venue manager sees that a comedian has 1 million followers and thinks that, therefore, seats will be filled and alcoholic beverages will be sold at astronomically inflated prices if only this name is on the billboard. Sometimes it works. It works just often enough to perpetuate the pattern of utterly untalented comedians being booked this way and never needing to actually write and rehearse material. This is a problem that can be solved. Venue managers, or whoever will now replace booking agents, talent agents, and entertainment lawyers, have to actually call in comedians for auditions, and they have to be prepared to tell comedians, quote, come back when you've written some new material. Of course, this can only be possible if the comedians are going to be paid enough to justify the exercise. It is so much cheaper and more time efficient to just glance at your phone and see an Instagram reel, or a TikTok, etc., to then make the booking decision on this basis. Well, if that guy gave her the pass, and this video has 10,000 views, I'm sure she can come up with something for next Saturday. That's the loop the industry is stuck in, as it spirals ever downward from industrial to charitable basis. Now, I have been in the room when comedians were having this conversation with a venue manager. So this is someone who's putting most of his time and energy into running a bar, running a restaurant, but there is space for a stage for comedy. and saying, yeah, no, he's a good guy. You should look how many followers he has on Instagram. Oh, no, she's great. Yeah, no, she can do the gig. No, you should book her. Here, look how many followers she has on Instagram. Or sometimes it's, oh, look, she had specifically this one TikTok video that was a big hit. She had specifically this one Instagram reel. This person who's maybe like a bartender first and foremost is looking at that. Yeah, okay, great. This Saturday. No other thought goes into it. They're not doing the work of even a booking agent, let alone a talent agent. Everyone's been complaining about gatekeepers for the past 50 years. But now, in the absence of gatekeepers, you see what a nightmare emerges when there is no gatekeeping anymore, when there no longer is a talent agent deciding who is and isn't talented.
Yeah, you're right. No, I mean, I think you did a great job presenting the audience with this problem. I do think it's something that could be solved. Don't know if it will be. We'll see.
It's harder when you don't have confidence that the audience exists for something. I've alluded repeatedly in this podcast to the golden age of the 1980s and the relationship it had to the 1960s. You want to know what the difference is between comedy in the 1960s and basically before, so 30s, 40s, 50s? The difference is that before the 1960s, stand-up comedy did not stand alone. It was part of a variety show. Vaudeville, physical comedy, music, a whole night of entertainment, food, drinks, prizes, circus acts, people playing the saw, acrobats, literally acrobats would get on stage in between comedy acts. And it wasn't all stand-up. It wasn't one person alone. Two guys. Yes, y'all. The most unsung heroes of stand-up comedy. Burlesque dancers. Strippers. They had burlesque. They had stripping of someone. They had sexy women and dancers coming on stage. Sometimes going all the way naked. Sometimes 9/10 naked. In between comedy acts. Nobody wants to face up to that. What started in the 1960s was the monotony of one man with one microphone. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point because, I mean, if people, think that Natalie Cuomo is hot and that's why they're coming to the show, I mean, it could just be that you actually have good writers like Bob Odenkirk, or, comedians who actually write good material. And then in between, you get burlesque dancers. That's the point. They're there to titillate the audience, as opposed to the stand-up comedian is there to do that job whilst, trying to keep the audience's attention for a full hour when it's just people getting up on stage talking about some trauma that happened to them in high school. It's a flawed art form for sure.
Right now in Detroit, is there an audience for a 1930s style comedy show? So aspects of vaudeville, aspects of burlesque, live musicians, and again, it's a vivid memory for me from the autobiography of Charlie Chaplin. He describes what live comedy was like in his era before he became a movie star. One of the acts that came on stage between comedians was a juggler who placed a billiard cue on his chin and then threw the billiard balls up and had them land on top of the cue. So this is an amazing act of balance, of juggling. And, this is before cocaine. But, I mean, the audience would be drunk. I mean, the audience would be, at least under the influence of alcohol and caffeine. But, the audience would be laughing and applauding and cheering for a man throwing billiard balls on his chin. Again, let's not delude ourselves about the sophistication of the audience, but you would have acts like that, and then they come off stage, and then you have a talking comedian act. I'm saying talk because, again, it wasn't always one person. 2 people, 3 people acting out scenes, sketches. This is also, the origin of the Three Stooges. In case you didn't know, there were 3 of them. They began actually as a 4-man act. Long story, not worth getting into. But, there were different kinds of spoken comedy, physical comedy. Okay, right now, 2026. Is there an audience for that in Detroit? Are there people who will pay a significant amount of money and be there, let's say, for 3 hours? And again, it's 3 hours in which they, like dinner theater. They eat food, they drink alcohol, they see this kind of performance. And when you do the math, it's not going to be cheap. You might as well do it black tie. You might as well have a dress code and require people to show up in a suit. It's gonna cost a lot of money. So is there an audience for that in Detroit? Is there an audience for that in Las Vegas? I don't know. Comedy today, you're competing with the cellular phone. You're competing with the ubiquity of internet distributed video. Obviously, conventional cinema is going bankrupt. Conventional television and radio are going bankrupt. What already happened to the book publishing industry, what already happened to the music publishing industry, is now happening to all these other industries. Are there people who are willing to pay, a significant amount of money for live comedy? The answer is we don't know. In theory, comedians, male and female, could get bookings by having daring acts of physical comedy on social media, jumping off a rubber roof to land on an inflatable mattress made of solid concrete, etc. But it is almost always sex appeal that's being bartered about here, male or female. Money, fame, power, respect, sex. Not necessarily in that order.
And everything to me is about a hustle. Even this shit I do now. So don't get it fucked up and twisted and think because the education and the degrees and all that shit that I'm some academic square-ass motherfucker who don't know what the fuck going on. Because if you did, I done played the fuck out of you. And guess what? It ain't nothing but a motherfucking game. And the game don't give a fuck who win or lose. The game's still gonna go down. And if you think you playing something, you being fucking played. Because if you don't know the game, you the goddamn game.